Natasha, welcome.
Hi.
This is great to have you.
It's really
You're
fun.
actually like third female, so you should feel honored.
Nice.
Yes, yes. It is high stakes around here. Hopefully, we're not intimidating, but you are a lifelong friend,
Yeah.
and an author,
Yes.
and a mother, and you have done previous podcasts around those kind of topics.
Yep.
So I'm interested to see just, kind of where this goes and have a fun conversation. We're just here for it.
Sounds good.
Yeah. There's no real agenda. But why don't you just start by telling us who you are and what you're all about?
Sure. So, like you said, my name's Natasha, and I am married. My husband, Amos, and I have 3 children. Our 2 oldest are adopted, and they are 19 and 18. And we had a biological baby many years later who is 5. So
Okay.
it makes a very, very interesting dynamics in our home sometimes.
Yep.
It's fun. But yeah, and besides that, like you said, I am a writer. I should know this. I don't know how many books I have out.
13. 13.
Is it 13? Okay.
I think it is. That sounds right?
That sounds right.
I did my research.
Good job. Good job.
That's
Yep,
a lot.
It is.
It's 13 more than I've written, so.
And they are kind of in different genres. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I forget sometimes where we're at. Yep. But yeah, that has been I haven't written any super recently because of the baby that surprised us 5 years ago. So that kind of threw off my writing schedule. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's kind of who I am. And yeah. I
like that. Do you feel like writing was always a passion of yours?
It definitely was. I think I was in 7th grade the first time that I wrote a novel.
Okay.
Which was, I have no idea why. I think maybe my English teacher had asked me something about it. And so I wrote a novel and gave it to her to read. And so, from then on, she was always like, oh, yeah, you're going to be a writer someday. So it was kind of on my mind.
Okay. So how old was that? You said high school?
7th grade.
Oh,
7th
okay,
grade, like
7th
13 probably. Is that 7th grade? Something like that.
Yeah.
When you say novel, like how many pages did you write?
Well, it was all handwritten, so
Cursive?
Probably halfway
man.
at least.
You're saying a lot of words people don't understand anymore.
Right.
Like 100 pages,
it was,
200?
It was at least 100 pages. I'm trying to think. There were probably like 20 chapters, and each one would be quite a few pages. So yeah, probably. So short for a novel, but long for a 7th grader writing it.
Long for me too.
At any stage.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with how people write hundreds and hundreds of pages of books.
Yeah.
And I don't really know the right questions to ask to help me understand that. But like, what is that like? How do you have enough ideas in your head to like write 100 to 200 pages of a book? It does not make sense to me. And how long did it take?
It's hard enough to read a few hundred pages.
Yeah. Like, and how long did it take to do that? Like, did you do it in an afternoon or like a week or a month, a year?
So like writing a book now?
Sure.
It depends a little bit on the type of book. But if I'm really focused on it, probably a month-ish. Wow. Something like that. But I don't often have, that's happened, but I don't often have that much time to put into it. Oh, yeah. One of the problems that I have now is that I have books that I'm working on, but I can only work on them a little bit, and then I'm interrupted a lot because of children.
Yeah.
And to get back in, you kind of have to get your mind there.
Yep.
And so if I don't have enough time, I need a couple solid hours without interruption to actually get into the groove of writing. And then I can produce quite a lot at a time. But you guys have small children, so you understand that a couple hours without interruption is not likely.
Yeah, especially for deep concentration.
Exactly.
That you're talking about. Man, I don't get it. It is so impressive to me.
Because people get writer's block, and that's all they're doing, and they don't even have those distractions. I can't imagine being finally getting in the flow of something, and then there's crying baby. And
right.
Oh, I guess I have to go do that.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind.
The reason I asked if it's always been a passion is because sometimes you find passions later in life, and that becomes wow, I'm really good at this, or I really enjoy this, I really love this. So growing up as a child all the way through is something you were interested in?
I think probably around the 7th grade is when I started really thinking about it more. I always read a lot. And so I think part of it was like, oh, like I could create my own stories because I was running out of books to read. So that was a lot of it. And then to be honest, like, so I had that idea and that passion, but I did not at all expect my writing career to look anything like it does. So the majority of my writing is all nonfiction. I do have a couple novels out now, but for years I just had nonfiction, and I wrote about infertility, and neither of those things were on my, like, I was going to write novels, and that was it. That was all that I had in my mind. And so when the Lord started opening doors for sharing other things, and them being things that I also didn't expect to be part of my life, it definitely was different than what I thought.
What was your 7th grade novel about?
It was I'm trying to think. It's like it had cowboy in it. I don't know.
Had a cowboy in it?
Had a cowboy in it. Horses were like really big. So, like that kind of thing.
So you're like the novels that you talk about writing as an adult, like what kind of novels? Like what's your genre?
So far I've really focused on what would be under the genre of women's fiction. So,
right up Nick's alley.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So it's slightly, it crosses over a little bit with romance, like the romance genre, but not necessarily. So women's fiction would have that the point of the book is something much deeper than just getting married or having a romance. Like, so that's a part of the story, but not the main storyline, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, and I started writing those because there were a lot of them coming out in the like secular market, and there were a few in the Christian market, but the ones where I had issues with all of them, and I was complaining about it one day, and my friend was like, if you don't like it, just write something different. And I was like, okay. So that was kind of how it went and why I started doing those ones. I have lots of ideas and lots of other books started in lots of other genres. Wow. So we'll see what happens next. But
do you think it's normal to like write hundreds of pages? Because it's not. Like for you, is it like just like to have hundreds, like to have lots of ideas and lots of things started, and to have like completed a lot of them too, like 13 books? Like, is that just like, that's like an everyday thing for you? That feels like, but to the rest, that's like to the rest of the 99%. That is like the most impressive thing to me. Like, but is it totally normal to you to be able to do something like that?
Wow. Yeah, I don't think much about. I mean, my husband says things about it because he can't. If I'm like, I only got 300 words written today, which is nothing, he'd be like, it would take me a week to write 300 words.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. If you had to break it down, that's exactly how it feels. Yeah. Like,
right.
I would. Yeah. Like writing. Like I remember writing essays and stuff in school, and like you do too. Like it stunk. Like when they give you a word limit, you're like, oh, like I got to hit a 500 word limit. Like there's no way I can do that. But
before ChatGPT.
Yeah. Then like how many words are like in a 500 page book on average, do you think? Do you know that? Like, do you know these things?
I bet I can find out. ChatGPT that mess.
My novels are about 100,000 words.
Oh my gosh. I don't understand.
That's a typical novel.
I don't get it.
Some of my other books are much less, like just depending on the.
And so the 100-page novel, like I said earlier that I don't know, I'm not going to know how to ask the question. I just really want to know, when you wrote 100,000 words, were you like, whoa, how did I do that? Or was it like, yeah, it's like, I did it. It's normal. To me, that seems impossible.
Right. I guess I didn't think much about it. Wow. I mean, I did think like, oh, good, I'm getting close to 100,000 because I knew that needed to be like, that's the average of a novel. So
how long do you think that project took you, like, to complete? Well,
my first novel took me quite a bit longer. It was kind of over a couple years. Like I worked at it and then I didn't work at it for a while and then I went back to it. And in between there is when I wrote and published a few other books. So, that one took a while. The second one in this series I think I had written like the first few chapters. So like, I don't know, 3,000 words or something like that.
Yeah.
And
just 3,000 words.
Just a couple thousand, there's nothing. No, and I had that kind of sitting there and I wasn't 100% sure. It took me a while to plot that one in my head. Yeah. I had a couple ideas of directions to go and didn't get around to it. But once I start writing, like for me, a lot of the length of time is like the processing things in my mind. And once I start writing, usually it goes fairly quickly.
Okay, so it's like a creative process where you have an idea of what you're going to write. So when you actually start writing, it kind of flows.
Yeah.
Like you already have the story, you just need to lay it out. Kind of.
I will often write to, like my phone is, the notes app is full of things. So if I might have a scene or a phrase or something that I have a list. So like for my next novel, there's a whole list of things. So once I start writing, if I get like, I can usually go through that list and be like, oh yeah, I wanted to put this in here and like that kind of thing. Man. So, you know.
Yeah, you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of like guys who like to build tables and stuff. You know, like it's like for you, it's like that's your, like that's fun for you.
Yeah.
Like you really, it's like creating something like like woodworking or I don't know what else. What else is there?
That's all. That's the only things there are. Books and woodworking.
Or like, you know, I remember as a kid like playing video games where you get to like build worlds and stuff. Like kind of like that. Like it's that's like a fun creative outlet for you that I've never been able to fathom. Like to me, like writing a book has always seemed like such a hard thing to do, like work. But for you, it's like it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's a fun thing.
There can be portions of it that are work for sure, like with anything.
Yeah.
But in general, it's fun. And for me, especially like once I have it written and you get to the editing, like some people are the opposite. Like they get to the editing and they just dread that. I love it.
Yeah, like getting to the end of a table and you have to sand it.
Right.
Yeah.
Dude, you're bringing it right to all the guys, man. You are relating.
Yep.
Girl woodworkers too. All right. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. That's interesting.
No, it's just I love having you get a little bit of feedback from someone. There are places that I was like, I don't know if that works, and then the editor might ask a question or say something that's like, oh yeah, that's right, and like to fit it all together more neatly, maybe or something. Yeah, it's very satisfying.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. That's very, very interesting to me. I can kind of like, just in like 10 minutes, I can imagine a little better how people do it.
Yeah.
Like it's fun. It's work, but like you actually enjoy it. And it's not like, I guess writer's block would be like miserable, but like it's fun.
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced that?
I definitely have. I always joke that there's a cure for writer's block, and that is you just have to go do something really physically active for a while where you can't write. So for me, we have a farm, so I would go clean the barn. And like my hand, like I can't stop and write right now, but my mind has time. It's like, using a different part of your brain maybe or something and let it. So that usually works for me. It triggers a lot of thoughts and then I'm ready.
Fascinating. Okay. Wow, cool. Okay, so I'm wondering, people who write novels, I've always kind of wondered, especially, like the maybe higher profile novelists, like, do they walk around and in their mind, they're just seeing a different world? Do you ever do that? Like, maybe not even some of the bigger books, like how do these people like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and like, how do
creating another world is a whole nother.
That's a whole, Can you relate to that at all? Okay.
I haven't done that. I actually, in my one novel, I was having a hard I was having a hard time in the one novel, and part of it was taking place in New York City, which I've only ever been very briefly, and so it was really hard for me. And so I was like, I need to do something here because I can't keep going here. So I had her go to a small town and visit a small town, and then I was good. Like I can go from here. So I've used much more like real life things for me. Yeah. But I am fascinated by ones that create worlds. And I have a couple books that are maybe someday I'll finish that are a little more that way. But it does take, that's another part of your brain, I think.
Yeah. Even totally, I can't understand any of that. Just unbelievable. Yeah. So I was just curious, like even writing your novels, and your other books, like you kind of have to become that character. You have to kind of live through that character and help them to develop. And that's kind of what I mean when I'm talking about like these things that aren't, like you're not actually doing, but you're writing and you have to become that person. Yeah. Very fascinating.
There is some to that for sure. Some of that, like thinking through somebody's, another person's brain a little bit. Yeah. But it's someone you made up, so it's doable. But for sure,
options
like
are endless.
When I'm working on a novel, like the main character, like right now I have one that I'm working on and I know who the main character is. And so as I'm going about, there are things that I'm like, oh, this would be an interesting part, or she would have seen this way, or, you know, like that kind of thing. And that's the Notes app on my phone. That's full of things or thoughts. Yeah.
So you have multiple personalities. Is that what you're telling us?
It might be. It might be.
Maybe that's what's connecting everybody.
When you switch phones, like, is it like, do not forget to back up my stuff because then you lose everything?
Yes.
Really?
I still have every old phone in my drawer and I have even taken this stuff and put it on a computer, but I'm still paranoid.
Yeah. It's like your life's work.
Right. Yeah. A Y2K comes along and just wipes it right out.
Right.
Wow, man, that is fascinating. It's like your craft. And so,
Yep.
still, like 100,000 words is nuts to me. Like that is like an accomplishment that, like, yeah, I feel like for me, if I ever wrote 100,000 words, I'd be like, all right, I'm done. Like that's like my biggest thing I'll ever do.
It's like running a marathon.
And you've already done it like 13 times.
It's like climbing Everest.
That's what it feels like to me. Yeah. It's just that I don't.
Okay, Nick,
It's so impressive to me.
If you had to climb Mount Everest or write 200,000 words.
How many pages is that?
Like 200,000 would be like 600 some.
That's a big book.
Yeah.
I might take the book. Yeah. In all seriousness, though, like at least there's a chance. Like no one's going to remember if I climb Mount Everest, but if you write a book, it's kind of like putting your name on something forever.
Yeah, it's out there.
Yeah.
Could. Yeah.
You must have that consideration. Like I'm putting this work out there. You got to make sure you're proud of it. Obviously,
there is that. That is actually a thing that can be a little bit hard. Like my first book, when it first came out, now it's been updated since then, but when it first came out, like my writing ability has grown tremendously. I mean, that was
right
a lot of years ago. I don't even know how many, but probably 15 years ago at least.
Which
maybe.
book was that?
Pain Redeemed. But that, yeah, the first time I remember going back and rereading it, like it had been out for a while, and you know, I had gone and like I would speak places and people would ask about it and I'd talk about it, but I hadn't actually like read it myself since I had published it. And the first time I did, I was like, oh dear. This is not my finest work.
Is there a delete button?
Right?
Start chasing down everybody who bought the book. They're like, I need that
Just
back.
kidding.
Can you read your books, or are you like, you know, people don't want to hear themselves see on camera?
Yeah,
or,
it is a little bit like that. It's a little bit like hearing your voice or watching yourself on camera. It is a little. Now, if there's enough, my novels don't bother me as much, but they're in a different voice than my voice. Maybe is part of that. But yeah, there is a little bit of
cringe factor.
I think it's okay.
Oh, do you mean like just self-criticism?
Yeah,
okay.
I think so. Yeah. I think mostly, yeah, or I would have worded that different. Actually, we just had, for Christmas, one of my books is a children's Christmas book. And for our Christmas program at our church, they had me read it. Or it wasn't the entirety, it wasn't everything, but it was a good portion of it. And I cannot tell you how many times I was like changing it as I read, which is what I do when I'm editing my own work. Like I fix things, especially I read it out loud often and will fix things to say better. Well, there's a lot of things you could say better than what I had.
Yeah. Like when you send an email and you notice right after you send it that you misspelled something.
Exactly.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
So yeah, that was a little bit of a challenge. I did change some things when I read it out loud. Because there were a few things that I was like, now that sentence could be so much better understood if it was worded this way, you know, like that kind of thing. But
I do that with my kids. I shorten books with my kids all the time.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Read this before bed. It's a 30-page children's book, and each page is a paragraph. And like they can't read yet. Well, now they can, but before I'd be like,
right.
And now they know you're full of it.
I'll skip like every 2 pages. I skip the page, skip every other page, and then make each page way shorter. Yeah.
This is public record now.
You do the same thing with your own books.
With my own books.
That's what the other books would be children's books. Is that right? You've written a few children's books?
Yeah, a couple children's books. And then one that's kind of in between. It's for teenagers. I mean, I wrote it for teenagers. Anyone can really read it. But, and then one's for adults. Yeah.
Cool.
So.
Looks like 7 nonfiction, 4 fiction, and 2 children's books. Sound right?
Sounds about right.
Man, we are on top of it.
Wow. What the nonfiction books, are they self-help style or informational or both?
So the two of them are, my very first one, Pain Redeemed, was, it's not really a Bible study. It's about my life, but it's very much was following like my walk with the Lord through dealing with infertility and how to identify where he was when things were painful. And so, so it's not really self-help per se. It's about my life, but it can be used that way to some respect.
Is there like an autobiographical, but not like
but not, it's not an,
like an actual autobiography.
Right, exactly. And the one after that, Counting Grains of Sand, is the same thing. That one talked about our adoption losses and, some of all of that. That was before we had our biological child, but it did, cover the losses and then our adoptions that we had. So definitely autobiography type, but also not fully. That again also is mostly focused on, okay, where is God when we're walking through things that don't make sense or are not what we expect, that kind of thing. And then the rest of the nonfiction are mostly either devotional or Bible study things.
Okay.
Some are more one than the other, but that type of thing. So a lot of it is stuff. A bunch of the nonfiction ones I wrote a lot on my blog. I have thousands of words that are just on a blog. And of course, blogging has gone down now. So that's not really the place that people go for information anymore. And I had a lot of requests for people like, oh, I love that, but I don't know how to find it again online once they read it once. So having it in book form is a lot nicer for them. So it was kind of for my, I don't know what the term is. I was going to say fans, but that sounds weird. I don't know. The people who read my stuff.
Yeah.
Those are fans.
Audience. There we go. Audience. That sounds better. Making it accessible for them. Yeah. So,
So you had a pretty active blog back in the day, or?
I did.
And what do you mean it went down? Like video stuff took over, or?
For sure, video stuff, and also like people just don't read long form online anymore. It switched to phones. When it switched to phones that people are mostly reading on, that cut it back. Like we had to do a lot shorter blog posts to be able to get people to actually read them.
Attention stuff.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's, at this point, at one point I don't know, it's nothing compared to some blogs, but I had thousands of views a day for quite a while, for a whole huge season. And now like maybe 50. I don't know if
thousands
that.
a day. Wow.
Yeah. So it's just a very big difference.
What would be the alternative to that more now is Substack? Are you familiar with Substack?
Yeah, I'm thinking about using Substack and I haven't switched yet. But Substack is actually replacing emailed newsletters.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different than the blog. But people are using that. There is
seems like
definitely
a big shift.
an audience there. But mostly like when I ask and I look at stuff, like people just like social media and they like videos and they like, just very short pieces that
super
it's
short.
a very different thing than writing books. So that's
like less than 30-second short kind of stuff.
Yeah, for the most part. If you have a really big audience, you can get them to watch several minute-long videos, but you have to be a lot more massive than me for that to
Gotcha, where
to
they're
be
willing
an
to
option.
watch your stuff versus trying to get traction.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what that
crazy
balance
world.
looks like long form informational versus just kind of you're not really getting the full context with the kind of stuff that you'd be doing. So maybe you can't even do it in a minute. Just be like, here's what I'm talking about. That's tough.
It's tricky. And it also is just another skill set. Like videos versus writing is like
night and day.
That's a whole other thing. You have to have different equipment. You have to, like everything's just, So that's been a thing in the blogging world that's been talked about. It was talked about long before it really hit, but they could see the curve of it coming, I guess you could say. And it was,
It's mostly attributed to social media internet attention spans.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Like when TikTok picked up, like Instagram affected it a little bit, but not completely. Like when Instagram was first going, I could post a picture and have a little bit of thing and send people back to my blog and they would go. And they liked the pictures, you know, and like I can do a picture, that's fine. But when it switched to the video content, even on Instagram now, Reels are a lot more, like in algorithms, they're going to come up more and things like that. So yeah, it's just different. And
so, yeah, a lot of work, it sounds like.
Well, yeah, because like if it's constantly feeding you more and more reels and more content, you're less likely to click on that thing that you might be interested in. And then you're definitely less likely to go to their page, interact with their page, unless it's really great content.
Right. And there's none of like the most, like Facebook was the only social media that you could post a link to a blog post that anyone could just click on and go right to that.
Yep.
And people just don't share them on Facebook as much anymore. Once in a while, I'll have something that people will share. And I'm like, oh yeah, it still works over here. But people just don't as much anymore.
Okay.
But every other social media site, I shouldn't say everyone, you know, I mean, well, Twitter is not really anything anymore. You could do it on Twitter, but yeah, most all the other ones, like they have to go somewhere. So like you put the link in your bio or something, but they've got to. They have to be interested enough to go there. It's like a multi-step to get them to go read something. So
that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, it really is.
I feel like that's like an oversight. I mean, it's a little bit of an oversight, I would think. Unless they're just trying to keep you on platform as long as they can.
Right. Yeah.
That's what it's about.
That could be what it is.
Yeah, an external link might send you to a web page. It's not theirs. They only care about the engagement.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Who's your favorite author?
Ooh, that's a personal question for a writer. And favorite genre and favorite book.
That is a very hard question.
Told you.
I think in general, I don't know that I have a favorite author per se. I definitely have like favorite childhood books and things like that. You know, like very typical ones like C.S. Lewis and stuff that were, stories that I loved or things like that. But as far as authors, like current authors, I feel like I often have ones, like there's a woman named Megan, I'm going to forget her name, even this is how terrible it is. I'm really bad. I can't remember if it's Megan Fate or Megan Marshman Fate. I'm not sure. But regardless, however she goes, she recently came out with a book called Relaxed, and she is a teaching pastor at a church, and the book is excellent, really, really excellent. So like currently, that's one of my favorite books that a lot of times if people are asking like, oh, what are you reading? That would be a big one that I would bring up.
Is it like seasonal at all? Like, is it sometimes you go through different seasons? I do that with like content or subject matter. Like I get overwhelmed or bored or whatever you want to call it, and then I just kind of switch to something else and find some new material. Yeah, for sure. And I think right now, I've definitely been in a season where just like I haven't been able to write because I haven't had time to focus on that, reading is a little bit the same way. Like I haven't had as much reading time, especially like in nonfiction things. I've probably read some fiction books, but I don't even remember what they are now because they just kind of drifted through my mind, which is fine. That's what they're there for. But the nonfiction ones that would be ones that really meant something to me or whatever, it takes me a long time to make it through one now if I have to stop and think about it. So I don't know if I have like a super favorite.
You don't have like an all-time favorite book and like book author genre? Like if you had to pick one, that must be hard for a writer to do.
I have so many books. I do.
That's like asking somebody like a director to pick their favorite movie. It's like I have to pick 10.
Right.
Or a table maker.
Or a
carpenter. Favorite tool.
Yeah.
That's true.
Everything is going to get analogized back to building a table for our guys out there.
Yeah, like that would be, I can see that being a difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know that I have one.
But fair.
Later I might think of one. But
Interesting.
I loved reading as a kid. But I experienced the same thing. Like I just don't have time as much anymore. I have more time than I think. We always have more time than we think Because like, how much time do you spend scrolling on your phone? Besides that,
Right.
I don't have as much time, obviously, to just like sit down and read for hours and hours. But as a kid, that is what I would do. Like I read so much, but I never, but even though I read as much as I did, I still always felt intimidated at the idea of writing. So hearing that, like, did you love to read as a kid too? When you just read all the time?
I did.
So similar experience there, but how it differed for you, like, was it intimidating to you getting into writing, or you at 7th grade, it must've been natural?
Yeah, it was just, it sounded like fun.
I wonder what that is. Like,
yeah. When I think about it
felt very scary to me.
Yeah. Well, I know in 7th grade, one of the things that happened is there was a series of books, and I think it's the only series of books that I read like as they came out. Most everything that I read was just books that we had in our house, whatever, or the library had, and I didn't think about what was coming out currently. But there was one series of books that I started reading, and she was still writing as I was reading them, so I was like waiting for the next one, and she stopped about that time. I might have been in 6th grade when the last book came out, and I was so disappointed that was the last book. And so when I think about it, I just read those books to my daughter, and so I realized as I was reading them to her that like that has a horse in it, and the horse name is Wildfire. Well, the book that I wrote then in 7th grade, I had a horse named Wildfire. So this was all, it definitely was like, this stopped. I don't have my favorite kind of book anymore, so now I'm going to write something to like, to go on with the story, to continue something somehow. So I think that was part of it, was like, I was reading and then was like, oh, I can't just always get more books, but I could always write more books. Like that I could do. Oh. And so that kind of...
That's neat.
That's a lot of ambition. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, like if you don't like the way a show ends, you just start making extra episodes.
Just write my own now.
Or if you're at the end of building a table,
just build another one.
That's great.
Yeah, that's really cool. What is writer's block? One more writer's question. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh no, you're good.
Do you know all this stuff because it's like your world? Like, what is writer's block?
She probably gets these all the time. She's just like, stop asking. I don't want to answer.
Has anyone ever asked you what that is?
I don't know if anyone's asked me what it is. I mean, I guess I don't know what the technical term would be. I would just think like, if I'm sitting down and I just can't think of what the next part should be, kind of, and
the creative juices are all dammed up.
Yeah, like you just can't picture. I don't know. I picture things in my head first and then write it. So that's
like all those crazy people who make the whole world, and they're
literally, Brielle asked me today if I could picture an apple in my head.
Oh yeah.
Maybe that's why I don't get it.
Okay, I do have to say,
like, no,
we had this whole thing about the apple, because that was a thing that went around at one point, like what you pictured if somebody said apple. Yeah. What's hilarious is I don't actually picture anything.
I never did that.
I actually picture the word apple.
Oh, that makes sense because you're an author.
And then if you give me more information, then I will picture it. My husband immediately has like a specific apple that he pictures, and it's this way and this color and whatever else.
Boy,
and
I'm going to try that on my wife later.
See what she... Yeah.
Never done that.
Felt a little insulting, but whatever. I'm not an author, so.
When I was growing up, I was never a big reader. I'm a little bit more visual and auditory learning. Maybe just the way I'm built. But more recently, I have been getting into reading more, and I'm really starting to enjoy it, which I never thought that I would. I've gone to college. I've written theses. I've done enough stuff to where if you look at me, you'd be like, yeah, you read some. I really don't read a lot.
Yeah.
So now I'm starting to actually, maybe it's just a getting older thing. I'm reading a little bit more, and I'm really enjoying the author's perspective and who's really good at writing. Because a lot of people that you talk to, they'll be like, oh, I've read all of this guy's books.
Yep.
And they just love the way that he writes. And I never related to that at all. I'm like, it's just words on a piece of paper. So, but yeah. Writing was more comfortable for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And homeschooling, like we didn't do a ton of writing through homeschooling. But once I got into high school and then into college, I felt, and then in my police work, of course, you're writing reports that are, 1,000 words or however much. Then I started to enjoy writing, no reading.
Yep.
And then, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a weirdo.
No.
Well, we all know
Practice.
that.
Yeah, I think reading takes practice.
It does.
Like once you get into it, gets a lot easier.
And having, depending on how your reading comprehension is, it takes a lot of joy out of it or not. And that's not, that is just how people are. My husband does not have great reading comprehension. So he reads the Bible. And that's like, by the time he does that, that's about enough reading for a long while. But it's because he has to read over like one paragraph several times to grasp all of it.
Yep, I'm that way.
And so he prefers, like, I will read stuff out loud to him, and he loves it. Like, he loves books. He would love to listen to them, but it's just like, it takes so much concentrated effort to actually retain the information that, he's much more auditory. Like,
Christian Chrisman came on and said pretty much that he likes to listen. And then Nick just gave him hate for like the next 30 minutes. He goes, "Oh, you're one of those. That's not reading."
Let's stop calling it reading.
I listened to an audiobook means I read the book.
I made a joke.
I listen to audiobooks too.
I joked one time that instead of saying that you read a book, because that's where the thing comes, whether you read it or not, if you listen to it, you just say that you devoured it. And then it doesn't matter if you listened to it or read it or ate it for breakfast, any of them.
That's a good point.
I
absorbed it. I absorbed that book.
Yeah.
I recently got into listening to audiobooks while walking. I used to listen to a lot of podcasts, but I've gotten away from podcasts. Like, I don't know if I just lost interest in the ones that I liked, and I haven't found any other good ones. But so I had to switch to something because I don't like to walk without listening to something. And so I've been downloading audiobooks and listening to them. And so I actually listen to quite a few audiobooks now.
You owe Christian an apology.
I do. Sorry, Christian.
Well, to be honest, I struggle to listen to audiobooks because
I used to too.
Well, I read very fast. And so listening to audiobooks, they're so slow. And if you speed them up, then the voices sound weird.
Oh, yeah.
So that's really like, but walking is the one if I'm walking, then I can listen to some. I've listened to a few that way because I'm not like chomping at the bit for them to like keep going.
Yeah. I used to I honestly feel like audiobooks take as much, well, maybe not as much, but they take practice just like books. The reason why I used to not like audiobooks is because I would stop listening on accident and then I'd have to go back, which involves getting in your pocket, like opening your phone. Like, it was very tedious. Yep. And like, the more I listened to them, the more I was able to focus on it and not miss parts. So but basically I would listen to an audiobook like you listen to a podcast. I'd get to the end of the audiobook and be like, what was the book about? Yep. Because you kind of like, I would kind of like phase out a bit here and there. And then versus reading, I have no comprehension issues, but I found comprehension very difficult with audiobooks. But I kept listening to them and that got better. So now I enjoy them because I feel like I can pay attention and actually get it like I'm reading it. Whereas before it was not like that at all. So
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. Different walks for everybody, I guess. I'm also not listening to podcasts as much as I used to. Maybe it's because I don't have so many outside chores to do.
There you go.
That's what it is. Yeah, I'm not. Maybe it's right. I'm falling out of it. But then we started our own podcast, so bunch of hypocrites. You glossed over the fact that you have a couple teenage children that were adopted and then had your own. That sounds weird. That's not what I meant. Yes, biological child later on. Can you just touch on that journey a little bit?
Yeah. So very soon after my husband and I were married, we knew that infertility would probably be a problem. I actually kind of knew before, but I was really hoping that it wouldn't be. But then we knew pretty much right away. And then, we had looked at different things. We doctored for a little while, and we kind of came to this point where it was like either we were going to pour time and money into fertility treatments, or we were going to do something else. And we both were like, you know what? I think actually we should just ask the Lord, does he have children for us? And maybe they weren't biological for a reason, for that kind of. And so we started looking. We looked at infant adoption first and then realized actually where the need is older children. And so that's what we ended up pursuing. And we did have a failed adoption first, which was we were matched with a little girl. She actually came for 2 visits. That I talk about that in one of my books. But and then before she was planned to come permanently, and it fell through, and it was a very difficult experience. And after that, my husband was like, okay, I'm done. Like that was, it was very hard. And so I asked him at one point, okay, I hear that you're done, but what would it take for you to say, okay, we'll try again? And he said, he had a whole list. I wish I could remember the whole thing. He can list it off because this was like the Lord and him having it out. But it included somebody, contacting us directly, having a reason why this child should be placed with us instead of somebody else, like a whole list of things. And as you can guess, that is exactly what happened. And so we were contacted about this little girl, and it was actually 9 months after the failed adoption, which meant something to me, not anyone else, but it was very, just very clearly the Lord working things out and showing us that this was our child. So we adopted our oldest first. Her name is Elizabeth, and she was 8 at the time. And then after that, we were matched with an expectant mother who was, I think, about 4 months along when we were matched with her. And we were walking through that process, and the baby ended up being born really, really early, 26 weeks, and was in the NICU. She lived for like 11 days. So it was long enough that she had passed a few hurdles, and we were like, like maybe she's going to be better. But she got an infection, and when they're that tiny, there's just not a lot they can do. And so that was a whole thing that next year of that loss. And we were kind of like, okay, I don't know about this. Like this is it's just a lot. It was really hard on our daughter then. Obviously she was really excited. Annie was the baby that we were, excited to bring home and didn't. And so we were really praying about it. And one of the things, like both Amos and I were talking at one point, and he's like, I know the last time we had a loss, I was like, I'm done. But this time, like, I think we have another child, and I think we need to bring him home, whoever it is. And so then there was a whole process with that. We actually were contacted about a different little boy, and there was a mix-up with the agency when we asked for more information, and they sent us the information for who's now our son, but that was not who we were asking about at the time. And I had told Amos, like, here, I pulled it up in the computer and was like, this is the information, you just read over it. Well, I was getting supper or something, and then we talked about it when he was done, and he was reading through, and he's like, this is not the kid that we were asking about. And he's like, he's older. It was a 4-year-old we were asking about. He's like, he's 8 years old. And actually, I remember very distinctly because he said, he's 8 years old, and he looks like me. And I was like, what? And so I went over, and sure enough, there's this picture of this little boy that looked a lot like my husband. And
no way.
We're like, okay, but it didn't look like that he wasn't in the list of kids that we had looked at because he wasn't able to be adopted into New York State. But then when we asked about him, we're like, I don't know, like, what's going on? You guys sent us this information. Well, it turned out there was a very small window when they opened up adoptions into New York State from some other states that had been closed for that. And it was during that window. It closed right after that. I don't think it's been open since. But, well, I guess I don't know as much now. But for quite a long time, it wasn't. Okay. So, again, it was just very much like the Lord orchestrating things and lining things up. And he came home. He was also 8 when he came home, so we joked that was just how we grew him. We'd bring 8-year-olds home. But so we had the 2 kids, and then right after that, it was a boy and a girl, and they both had a lot of trauma. We'll just put it that way, which was, we knew when we were adopting older kids that was going to be part of the story. Like that is just part of it. And it took like probably, you kind of have a honeymoon period after kids come home, where things are okay, and you think like, okay, we're kind of establishing, this is all right. And sometime in the next year after our son was home, things just disintegrated, and it was like all of the trauma just exploded. And it was a lot. And so our minds were like not at all on having more kids, adopting more kids, anything. Like, people would ask us sometimes, and we were like, we are barely surviving. This is, no. And so that was, we had quite a few years like that. And then when they were, Lizzie was 13. She was 13 when I found out I was expecting, and Benj would have been 11, 12. Yeah, they were 13 and 12, and then Liz turned 14 before the baby was born. But yeah, we actually, we were not expecting or looking for having any children, and we actually had the flu come through our house, and after the flu went through, or like the stomach bug, I was still sick for weeks, and we just didn't I just thought I'm not getting over the stomach bug. Like, come on.
Whoa.
And
Okay.
Amos actually, it was this time of year actually, and he had a trip to Alaska planned to go help a friend. And before he left, he said, "I think you're pregnant." And I was like, "You are nuts!" Like we'd been married 11 years at this point, right? Like, this is not a part of our story. And I was just like, "No, honey." I mean, I think I told him like straight out, "No, that's impossible." Maybe. Obviously didn't know what I was talking about, but I thought I did. And he was like, "Well, if you're still sick when I get home, you're going to take a test." And I was like, "Okay, whatever." And so he flew to Alaska, and I was violently sick. And my mother finally was like, she just showed up at my house and was like, "Take a test." And so, yeah, I was over 7 weeks by the time we figured it out anyway. And we were just in shock and like, "Oh, okay, well, I guess everything's okay." And of course you're worried the whole time then, like something didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And that was a whole process and trust of saying like, "All right, Lord, and it turned out that I had like as perfect of a pregnancy that you can have. And she was born, and she's a little spitfire. She's added a lot. So now our home has a 19-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And the gap in the ages is fascinating. Yeah, the most common thing that I say in my house is to my son, which is, "Please stop acting like the 5-year-old and act like the 18-year-old. Maybe she'll rise to the challenge." Yep. No, because they are siblings, they bicker and pick at each other or whatever. But it still is kind of surprising. I joked for a long time that it was kind of like Christmas morning every day. Like, "Oh my goodness, we have a baby. Like, what in the world?" Yeah. And it still feels like that sometimes, like when I really stop and think about it, like, I was not expecting this. So yeah, it's been an exciting journey. It's been really, incredible to just see the Lord's faithfulness, and the fact that his faithfulness didn't change, like the years that we didn't have babies. And then when we did, he was exactly the same. And that's, the goodness of God, right? He is. And so, yeah.
What would you say are some of the key takeaways from what you learned during the process in between when you found out about the infertility, then the struggles with the adoption process, and then kind of full circle having a biological child? That's tough. There's a lot of movement there.
It is. There's a lot. I think one of the biggest things has really been this idea. Okay, so I mentioned the goodness of God, right? Like that he has been good and he has been faithful all the way through. And one of the things that I felt like dealing with infertility, and then even once we had children, then dealing with all of the effects of trauma, which was worse in some ways. I don't know. I shouldn't, I'm not really rating it, but it was another kind of really hard, right? And I say worse only because it was dealing with people that I loved, right? It wasn't just myself and what I'm dealing with, but like these children that I adore, and I can't fix everything for them, right? That was really hard. And so I think part of it was learning that God's goodness is like collective. It's like God's goodness is here collectively in the church. So it's not just about what I get or how I'm being healed or freed from something, but the fact that God is working elsewhere. So like, I didn't have babies, but you know what? You guys did, right? Like, or whoever, like other people, my children might still be struggling, but you know what? There are kids that have walked through trauma that the Lord is freeing and he's healing. And so like looking at it more collectively and recognizing like, God is working, he is moving, even if I'm not like reaping the benefits of it personally, that being part of the body means that we can all rejoice in that together. That was a big lesson in there. learning to, I think one of the first time that I heard that somebody else was expecting a baby and all I felt was joy, even though I didn't have any, was like, oh, thank you, Lord. Like that there wasn't, and there were other times then, even after that, that I still struggled or had a hard time. It's not about it being perfect, but just that the Lord is there and he is helping me and he is good. He is, right?
Yeah. What what is it like? What was it like? It must have been different starting your parenting journey with 8-year-olds.
Oh my, yes.
Which I guess you don't really have anything to compare it to.
Well, I do now.
But you do now.
Yeah.
So what was it like then having a newborn and like starting over basically?
Honestly,
like you get to be a parent twice.
Yeah. I will tell you, we knew that it was different starting with 8-year-olds. We knew that there were a lot of things that would come up and be like, oh, like, I guess they weren't taught this, or there wasn't like. Seems
very unfair to be given, like if I was just given my 7-year-old with no like experience and how to handle, like no 6 years of working up to it. Like, how did you do that?
We don't know. We have no idea how we did that.
Still figuring it out.
I will tell you, when we had the baby then, I was actually surprised at how much grief that I had to process about what we had lost with the other kids, that I hadn't even, I knew that we had lost things with them, but when I was actually walking through it and being like, oh, this is what I lost, and this is what I lost, and this is what they lost, like that kind of thing. There was a lot of processing that took place. And that was a little bit surprising to me. Like I hadn't really thought about that until I was in the middle of it. But yeah, it is tricky starting with 8-year-olds for sure. It's tricky dealing with trauma or attachment disorders. That's actually most of my reading for years was on attachment disorders and what we could do or not do. And, we got some things right and some things very wrong. And, it was just a whole process. One of the things that I am learning, actually the last 2 years have been pretty rough with, the ramifications of some of that in our kids. And I knew that even when they were little. I remember saying to myself, I know they're going to have to go back and deal with this stuff. I know that, and I know it might not be pretty, but I'm going to try to give them a childhood. That was the thing I kept going to was if I give them a childhood, then they have some kind of foundation so that when they have to go back and deal with the trauma in adulthood, where they can actually, their brains can actually process it and things like that, that they'll have something to stand on. So that was kind of my goal. That's when it actually started playing out in life and I started watching the trauma really affect them and I couldn't do anything about it. I was not so at ease about it. It was very traumatic for me and very, I was just in a lot of grief for a long time over it because I just didn't want it to be as hard as it has been. But I have been, getting to the place actually recently. This is a whole thing, but the Lord really used this. Recently, I don't know if you guys know, there was a family that lost a little 5-year-old boy. And I was listening to watching the funeral.
Live stream,
And one of the things that the father said in talking about it is he said, I couldn't protect him, and then I couldn't save him, right? Because it was an accident, and so he couldn't protect him from the accident, and then he couldn't save him when it happened. And he was, talking about this, but it hit me like a ton of bricks that was actually the thing that I was dealing with when it came to my kids and the trauma that they're processing right now, is that I wanted to protect them from it and I couldn't. And I wanted to save them from the ramifications of bad choices in the middle of it, and I couldn't do that either. And having to get to the place where you just open your hands and say, all right, Lord, it's not mine. They have to live their lives, and I just love them. That's all that I can do. And I shouldn't even say that's all that I can do, but that is that's my job, is to love them and to be here. And that's all that I have control of. And everything else just has to, that it's between them and God, I guess. And the learning to trust, God pursued me and God pursued my heart. And I trust that he's going to pursue my children. And that's true for our adopted kids, but it's also true for our biological child. she's going to have her own process and her own things to deal with, and she's going to have to either turn to the Lord or not with them. And so, yeah, just learning to open your hands a little more and trust. Yeah, just trust. Trust is not my not the thing I'm greatest at.
What do you mean? Like you like to feel like you're in control?
Yeah, for sure.
Crosses over.
Maybe that's why I like writing books. I control all of it.
Yeah. It's fun in book writing, but when it comes to parenting, often guilt comes along with that a lot.
Yeah,
I think I can relate to that a little bit. Like often when you try to take too much control in your parenting, there's a lot of guilt that follows because you don't usually do it well or do it right. It's a lot of screw ups that come after trying to take control.
Yep. For sure.
Yeah. So when you were saying earlier that when you had, it's Mary Kate, right?
Yes.
When you had Mary Kate, that she was growing up from like birth to 8, that what you lost with the first 2 children and what they lost really in their own lives. You meant that's what you meant? Like that you didn't know them as from birth to 8.
Yeah.
And that was a lot. That was hard, and you had to work through that. Yeah,
that we didn't know them, that there were so many experiences that they had, and they don't, I mean, they remember some of them, but they don't even remember a lot of them. It's actually fascinating how much parents do to organize kids' memories of their childhood.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, it's very, and I think about even in adulthood, sometimes I'll be like, yeah, Mom, remember this? And she'll be like, well, that's not exactly how it happened. You know, like, and she'll like organize it for me and be like, oh, okay. Like it was kind of just all mixed up in there. So one of the effects of trauma is this disorganization. And so like from the time that they're 8 on, I can help my kids organize things, but I have some information from when they were little. I got as much as I could and tried as much as I could, but ultimately I wasn't there and I don't know what happened. And so there's that side of it. But then there's also this side of like the other day, there was something my daughter really wanted, my youngest really wanted Mary Kate. And I told her, oh no, like, that's not something we do. It was actually just a movie, but I was like, no, we're not going to watch that. I don't think it'll be really good. I think it'll scare you. Like we just don't really do that. And she was like, oh, okay. And like went on, and I thought, oh, that's weird, because that was very different. All of the things, like just who we are as a family, how we run our home and our life. Like my older kids pushed at everything because they had lived in families that didn't have those, systems or how things were set up or anything like that. And so to them, it was like a personal thing that I was picking on them if I said no to something. Whereas, and not that I'm sure there are times that my youngest will feel that way too, but just in general, like the general feeling, she trusts me. And she just automatically trusts me at 5 years old that if Mom says this or if Dad says this, like, oh yeah, that's trustworthy. My older kids still don't really have that. I mean, to some respect, there's a little bit. My son, probably the most. He would feel like if he's talking about something and I'm like, no, Benj, that's not, no. He would stop and listen to me, and what I said would make a difference. But in a lot of ways, like if we were all sitting with my kids when they were 10 years old and you guys said something different than me, they would probably take what you said because they don't know you as much, and that's how attachment disorders work, right? So that they didn't know you as much, then you're probably safer because it flips everything, right? And so the ones closest to them are the ones the most suspicious of. And that is, I knew that was there. I knew that was hard, but it was very different now watching it play out the opposite with our youngest, that no, she actually trusts us more than anybody else. Oh, that's weird. I haven't had a kid that did that, so that's a whole other side to it that, like I said, I knew it was there, but I hadn't experienced the difference. So,
very well laid out. That sounds wild.
Yeah, and you have a very special perspective, like to offer people who have, especially adoption in late adolescence, and that the period, even up until 7 is like so crucially important that some people would think like, oh, once you put them in a stable home, then they'll be fine, and it's just like it's not the case.
No.
It's too psychologically damaging, even if the memories aren't, exactly right, there's something that they don't associate with security.
Yeah. And the biggest thing I think is having an adult that you can trust, right? So it's not just kids that are adopted. They're kids can be in their biological homes and have the same problem, right? That the parents or whoever is in charge is not trustworthy. Yeah. And so it flips to where you are the least trusting of the people that you should be trusting the most. And that really messes with how you process things. A lot. My biggest joke with my oldest is that if you learned it on TikTok, I might know more than TikTok. I might. Not in every subject. Not in every subject. But some of them you might want to double check.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas most of what I know is from TikTok and YouTube. So,
like how to build a table. Okay, last time. That was the last one. That was the last one.
That was pre-TikTok, to my credit.
Yeah. Some of what you were just talking about, kind of going through that learning process, is been a theme lately on the show here, and I don't know if that's just the way that it's been or if there's a reason for it, but just like this path to surrender. Like at some point, you get to a point where I can't do anything more, and you have to like just let go.
Yeah.
Like how that's so contrary to your urge, your nature. You want to be able to fix things,
Yeah.
And you can't. You just have to kind of let go, let the Lord take care of it, and then be okay.
Yeah.
There's so many stages there. They're all hard.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think a lot of people try to take control because they're trying to avoid guilt later. And it's always interesting to me that I've observed that people who don't know the Lord, when they do that, the guilt doesn't seem to follow. And I don't know why that is. I find that interesting, but I feel like in my experience, like if I try to take control, I usually go too far and then I end up feeling regret for how I handled it. But I see a lot of cases where without the Lord, that doesn't seem to happen. And so it creates like a vicious lifelong cycle that they don't even know is there. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that the Lord is at the center of it somehow, in that you take control because you feel like if I don't do something, I'll regret it later. And because we're heroes, like we want to take control and we want to be heroic and be in control. But really the best thing to do is to trust the Lord. And it's like a reverse psychology thing. But I think the point is that the Lord needs to be the center of that whole process, or else you can go a whole lifetime of relationships that don't know the trauma that they're causing.
Right.
Yeah,
for sure.
So much of this is so countercultural. Like if you reflect on it, and you're exactly right. This is not something that is specific to adoption. Obviously, when you look at broken homes, when you look at fatherless homes, or, specifically, because there's a lot of data on that, just broken families, it doesn't have to have adoption mixed in there at all. There's a lot of people who are disaffected and disassociated from their own families because for whatever reason, that stability is not there, the intentions aren't there, then the trauma kind of ensues, and then it's not taken seriously, and then at some point it comes back and it rears its ugly head, and it has like serious consequences.
Yeah, and I think people a lot of times don't know how to handle, even if they don't label it guilt. Some I think maybe Christians maybe have have words for it.
Right, yeah. Guilt is a word that's not usually allowed, but I think gets the point across.
Right. Yeah. But I think in other homes or just secular homes, they might not have that word, but a lot of times like the parents' response might be like, well, I was doing the best that I could. Like I didn't, which is true, right? Like it's a true thing. Like we can only do what we know, right? That's the reality for all of us. But if we can recognize, and this is what comes back to, like I said, I can't protect my kids all the time, and I'm not going to be able to save them all the time, right? Like recognizing my own humanity in this, that I am not the healer. I believe that Jesus is, and that's what gives me hope, but I'm not the healer. And so I can do the best that I can, and I want to do the best that I can. But I actually can't work harder and fix everything, which is maybe a little bit of the American idea, is that if you just work harder, things will get better, right? And that there really are things in life that it doesn't matter what I do. It was actually at one point when one of my children were having a really, really rough time. We kind of started in this season, and there had been a lot of accusations thrown at me of things that I had done in my parenting or failed to do or whatever else. And I was going to the Lord with it because I internalize a lot of things. So I took it all and looking at myself okay, did I do this? And of course some of it's true because I'm human, right? But one of the things that I felt like the Lord told me was that if I had done everything exactly right, my child was still going to be where they were, because they were at the place that they were because of their own heart. It was their own trauma and their own things that were putting them there. And so, yes, I could have done things more perfectly, but doing it more perfectly wouldn't fix my child. That's not how it works. It's not our perfection that makes our kids great, right? And so, yes, we want to work at doing things, and there were things that I needed to be more careful with how I said things or how I responded or how snappy I got when the chores weren't done or whatever, like that kind of thing. Yes, for sure. But that's not when we're actually looking at the heart issues. Each person's heart issues are their own, and our 5-year-old already, I can see her own heart issues coming out, right, that she's going to have to deal with. And my parenting may make some things easier, but ultimately she's going to have to deal with her own heart. And I believe that Jesus is the way to do that, right? And so I'm going to try to show her that and teach her that, but she will make that decision. And so having that release of it being okay, and being able to say I am sorry for the things I got wrong, because you are right. I definitely said and did things. Sometimes I knew that I was doing something that was hurtful, and sometimes I didn't even realize how hurtful it was, but I for sure did that. And so taking that responsibility, actually this was, so I grew up at a Bible school in Alaska, and I remember one time a bunch of people sitting around, and they're, growing up at a Bible school, people just talk about deep things a lot, right? Sitting around, and they didn't watch TV, they talked, right? And so they were talking about parenting at one point, and the one guy said, yeah, I think I figured out parenting. And they're like, yeah, tell us. And he goes, so this is what you do. You raise your kids, you get them all grown up, and then you call them all home and sit them all down and be like, I am so sorry.
For my failures.
All of the places, I am just really sorry and I love you.
And then send them out.
But just this acknowledgement of we're not going to get it all right. We're not. But yes, of course, we work at it. We try to, deal with the things, confess when we've done something wrong, all of that. But ultimately, our kids will decide which direction they're going to go on their own. And that's a very hard thing to do, which right now we're like I said, I have a 19-year-old and an 18-year-old, and they're making decisions for their life. And I'm watching them sometimes being like, okay, and sometimes being like, oh, baby.
Maybe not that way. Maybe not that way.
Yeah.
Please don't.
So in that whole process, when is an appropriate time to offer wisdom, because they're not always asking?
I'm really bad at this.
Like wisdom versus control, because you do have a role in their life as a parent. What does that look like? For us right now, I don't know what the answer is. It's really, really hard for us right now. So our oldest had left home when she was 18. When she was not living at home, it was a little bit more easy, a little more easy. Easier. There we go. Author.
The writer.
Corrected an author.
This is what I do when I'm talking. When I'm writing, I can figure it out. No, it was a little easier because she wasn't right under our roofs. She would tell me some things, offer some information. She didn't ask a lot of questions, but if she did, I would answer them. And if she didn't, I just would let it be. So that felt a little bit easier. She is home now, and I don't know how much longer she'll be home, but she is right now, and it is a lot trickier. Not just because she's home, I think, but also because we are still raising other children in the home to, that makes it a little bit different. So our son is 18, but he's still in high school. He's not at the place to be like 18 and moving out of home or anything like that. So he still has a lot more, we have a lot more input on what he's doing and what is okay. And, he still loses things when he doesn't have his homework done, like that kind of thing. Oh, yeah. So it's a different stage of life. And then, of course, we have a 5-year-old. And so, like, what happens in our home or how you talk or what you listen to or any of that kind of thing, there's a lot of stuff that I know our daughter would prefer that, like, why are you telling me what to do? I'm an adult kind of thing. But because she's in our home and we're raising kids, it's pretty sticky. It's messy.
Interesting dynamic, yeah.
Yeah, it's very, if she was an only child, I think it would look a little bit different and we would make different decisions. Right now, we're kind of just like giving it our best shot, and sometimes being like, I don't know if that was the right way to go, but that's what we did, kind of. It's tricky.
Challenge.
Yeah.
When they were 15, 16, and you still felt like you had all the authority in the world, but you had to have that self-control. What does parenting look like at 16 versus 8, 9? In that way, like wisdom versus control. Are you still suggesting, or are you still telling, or is it shifting towards like suggesting, but then like they're still a kid, and if they make the wrong choice, like what do you do?
So even with our story, it's a little bit,
different.
It just wasn't quite as streamlined. So by the time I was 16, my parents were suggesting. I asked them things like that. That's how our relationship worked. And so if I had an idea, I would be like, oh, I think I should do this. And they would respond and whatever else. And there were a few times that I remember distinctly. My dad doesn't talk he doesn't talk. He's a pastor. He does talk. No, but he doesn't, he's not pushy with things at all. He's pretty quieter and laid back. And so I remember distinctly the times that he like took the time to pull me aside and be like, this is not the right way to go, or you should not be doing this. And it wasn't very often, but it was now and then.
Did that give, sorry to sidebar, no. Did that give it more weight? Because it wasn't like it was.
Did you still go and do it anyway?
Did it mean more?
I did not do it. I don't know if it did or not. I was very sensitive to people's, not just anyone's, but like the people that I looked up to. I really wanted them to think well of me. Like that was just how my personality was, I guess. And so I think I probably would have responded that way even if he did it often, but I don't know. It's hard to tell. But
I'll have to ask your siblings then.
Yeah, maybe. But for sure, I don't know. My stage at 16 was very, very different than where my kids were at 16. So one of the things with trauma and not having stable homes is that there's like so we have our age and we have our like intellectual age. Like there's our physical age, our intellectual age, then emotional age. And so with adopting older children, one of the things that we found is their emotional age was a lot younger. Right. And it kind of started, both of them were probably at like, they were 8, but they were probably more at like the 2 to 5 year old stage emotionally, not talking intellectually or anything like that, but emotionally, like how they responded to things, how they responded to us, all of that kind of thing. They were much younger. And so that means by the time that they were 16, they weren't really 16, which was also part of it that was a little bit tricky. And so there was still a lot more, like we tried to pull our hands off different times, like to be a little more like, oh, you're getting old enough, like we'll let you do this. And it was almost always a very bad failure.
Interesting.
It caused a lot of, just a lot of stuff. We had to have a lot more personal like surveillance. I don't know what the word is, but like we had to be present and a part oversight. There we go. Of what was going on, even when they were a lot older. So even like our oldest, he goes to school and he stays home some and stuff, but he doesn't do what some 18-year-olds would do. But it's not that he's not intellectually capable. Like that's fine. But he just like, even when he's home, like if he's home and we're gone on a trip, he will call multiple times, like check about this or check about that, which is fine. But it's very much more like probably what a 16-year-old would be, right? Yep. That's left home he's home taking care of the animals at the farm, right? So it's a big responsibility and whatever else, but it's, he's not like, oh, I'm an adult and I'm out of here kind of thing. He's not there, which is good. It's wonderful because he still has growing up to do, and he's got, as long as he's willing to do that with us, it's good. But that was one of the things that happened with our oldest, is that, she hit 18 and she was going to go out on her own, and she wasn't greatly prepared to do that, but she tried, and she's back home now for a little bit, and hopefully the next time that she moves, hopefully she'll be at a better place. You kind of have to let them at 18 because they're legally right. But it is, it's just a little bit different. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily suggest what we did for most people, put it that way, of how much, like even my daughter had a phone. When she got a phone, I had parental apps on it until she was 18, right? 17, I guess. But that was, things just didn't go well if we took our hands off of it. But again, there could be a debate. Maybe we should have. I don't know.
Yeah. All you know is your own experience.
Right, exactly. We did our best with what we knew at the time. And
that is like the parenting experience right there.
Yeah.
Did our best with what we knew.
Right, exactly.
We were winging it.
Pretty much.
Yep. So now you've got Mary Kate coming up, who you've had from birth to 8, and it will likely be a whole new experience.
Yeah.
And like being a parent, a new parent for the second time.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've probably thought a lot about that.
It has been, Yeah, we have. I've wondered sometimes, how things would go. There's also, she has our influence, but of course her siblings are very influential on her too, which sometimes is really good and sometimes is scary, because there's a lot of brokenness there, and that's just what it is. That was that's part of our family now. It's just part of the dynamics of it. And so, I don't know how it will look, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, like when she turns 8, I guess it starts.
Right,
that's when you start knowing. Yeah. Do you know? Have you in the adoption circle? I'm sure you've met people. We have mutual friends too.
Right.
But anyway, have you guys met anybody else that has had a similar experience with 2 adoptions and then being able to get pregnant biologically? Or are you guys kind of unique? Do you know anyone else that has had a similar experience like that?
I know that there are definitely ones that have, but I feel like I'm trying to think. I feel like it might be like somebody telling me about somebody they know that happened to.
So no one really directly to share this experience with, who knows exactly what you're talking about. I'm just kind of wondering how unique this experience is.
Right. I know, we have some friends who had a biological child and then many years later adopted, and so would recognize some of the things, but it was flipped.
Right,
they had the biological one first. But it's been, I feel like it's been fairly unique. Now there are some things with adopting older kids specifically, but adoption in general, but older kids just has more trauma to it in general. But I can always tell when somebody really gets it. So I was, during one of the hardest seasons, one day, Brock's mom showed up at the door with a meal. She just dropped it off really quick, and I burst into tears because I was feeling very trapped in my home with trauma exploding around me all the time, and and she just knew it, and she got it, and we don't even talk that often, but she had heard that things were hard and recognized that. And so there's people like that have, even if their stories are not exact for things, that recognize that this is a really hard experience and that none of us really know what we're doing. But we're all doing our best, and we're dealing with people who matter, like, I mean, they're our children, so they matter because of that, but also they're just human beings that, their lives and their stories matter, and somebody has to be witness to it. Right. And so I'm learning to be thankful that I get to be witness to my children's lives and their story, and also thankful that there are people that understand that that's also really hard at the same time, even while I'm very thankful for it. That's super valuable.
Yeah, so important.
So I mean, there are so many people that, like adopt. What would you at 8? What would you call that kind of adoption? You've used
I call older child adoption.
Older child adoption that have experienced older child adoption, and so like that's not unique at all. And then kind of a twist comes in where you guys weren't expecting to get pregnant, and that's kind of where the story takes a bit of a turn.
Yeah.
As far as uniqueness goes, which is just really cool, like to know somebody like that. Like I don't know anybody. Right. Like you'd be the only one. So I'm just curious if in your world, like is that a unique experience? So anyway, that's cool.
I've heard like it seems like I've maybe heard similar things, but never firsthand. Like
it's,
yeah.
Which shows you how rare it really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're all pioneers of our own personal families in our own ways, and nobody else really has the exact right answer. It's so funny, especially in Christian or spiritual circles. There can definitely be the tone of like, here's how you raise your kids. This is the right way to do it.
I laugh at those books now.
Right, there's one way to do it. It worked for us, so that's the only way to do it. And like the truth is all dynamics are different. Everybody's personality is different. Everybody's scenarios are different. And then you throw in upbringings that you weren't a part of into your family, and now it's a part of you.
Right.
So
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know what you would say to that anymore.
I
think that's becoming more. Yeah. In case you need any more book ideas.
Yeah, you could be like the TED Trip of older child adoptions and how to perfectly parent your kids.
Right. Yeah. I think there is definitely a wave. And maybe it's just because of information. Maybe it's younger parents, at least in circles that we're in that have more access and are actually talking about these things more often. Like I've had a few guests that we've had on, and other people who've been like, man, when I was 25 to 30, like we didn't talk about any of this.
Yeah.
Like, nobody told me about any of this. And I feel like you guys are so much further ahead, just knowledge, how to, try these things.
The information is so crazy different now. The access to information. And even like, especially when it comes to like adoption and things like that, even since we adopted, which would be 11 years ago now, the information and availability to help with a lot of the parenting challenges or the trauma, dealing with trauma and triggers and all that kind of stuff. It is just, there's so much more access now. But especially like ones that adopted before us, I feel like even like the wave that was just before us didn't have half the information that we did. And even with that information, we still,
mess up our kids.
But I do think one of the things that is very helpful is being able to name things and to identify like, like this is like naming an attachment disorder is very valuable. Because otherwise it becomes personal. Like, my child actually doesn't like me. Well, that's not true. Right. They don't dislike me.
Non-specific, shadowy thing that you don't really understand. It's like, actually, we have literature on this, and here's...
Right. And we have literature, and they have, like, they scan brains, and they can identify, like, you can see in the brain what these things do to a child and their ability to connect and attach things. I mean, that's why the attachment name is because there's, like, pathways in their brain that they're not attached. They weren't able to. And so now their brain has to figure out a way around that. Yeah. And sometimes they can heal some things in childhood, which my kids did. They did heal some things. There have been, I look at places and areas and the ways that they do feel like they belong. Like every one of those things was a victory. Like, that they know who they are a little bit. And they know who's trustworthy. So even when my daughter left home, it was really hard. It wasn't good. It wasn't healthy. And then when she called us and said, "Can I come home?" It was like, no matter how bad that was, no matter how sad I was over any of it, the fact that she knew she could call to come home, like, that means that somewhere in there, something healed, right? And I'm so thankful for that. I'm thankful for her sake. I'm thankful for mine. For our family in general, but like, that is a victory. And so being able to identify those things and have names for them is just, it is very helpful. That doesn't mean that it's easy or that you know what to do, right? Yeah. It just means that you can identify what it is. But that's like if you have a sickness, like, it makes a really big difference when you can identify what your sickness is versus being like, I just feel bad, right? Yeah. That can be really discouraging and depressing. Whereas when you can like pinpoint it and name it, it's like, okay, so this is, cancer, or this is whatever the thing is.
Treatments or proven track records, or even just data, or like you said, literature on here's how people deal with these
And I think especially feeling like you're not going crazy, right? Because that's where, like, the thing that's a struggle when you can't identify something is just feeling like, is this just in my head? Is this just something that I don't, is it just me? And once you can give it a name and identify it that way, like, oh, like, this is a thing. This is a real thing. It's not just in my head. It's identifiable, and that is just so helpful. So,
Do you, as a mother of adopted children, do you have any opinions about like American culture as a whole, what we're doing in families, what we're doing in society to create a lot of these issues? I don't know the circumstances of obviously your children, and we have adoption in my family too, and circumstances are different for both of them. But it does seem like we're in a little bit of a collapse as far as the family goes, generally speaking. Do you have any insights on that? Just from what you see, you read a lot. You're very well versed in these things. So
I do think. I think that there has been a lot of. I don't know if this exactly answers that, but I think there's been a lot of shifting in my perspective, even about adoption, in going through some of these processes. And not that I'm not opposed to it. I still think that is wonderful. I think it is a gift. I think it can be healing. I think that children deserve families. But I do think that there has been kind of a misconception maybe about what adoption can and cannot fix for children. And I think that that's a little bit part of it. So our circumstances with our kids were very different. They had failed adoptions first before they came to us. And so we were literally adopting the kids that had received homes and lost them again after losing birth parents, right? Yeah. So it was, it's a lot of extra trauma, but but it's still, I don't know, it was a little bit of a different circumstance. But then looking at young, specifically young women, right? Because that's usually young women who are having babies that struggle to care for them in some way, and realizing, like, I do realize that the best thing for that baby is for the mom to be okay. Like, that is the best thing for them. That is so with this, my oldest has a baby. She had a baby at 18, and he is at our home with us too. But one of the things that has been come up with whether or not she could care for him, and the ultimate thing is, I know the best solution for him is for her to be okay and to be able to care for him. Yeah. And I think for a while there was kind of this mindset of maybe the best solution for a baby is for them to just be in an unbroken home somewhere, right? Like, just put them in with a mother and father from birth. I mean, people kind of knew that from birth mattered, but to just do that, and that would protect the child from more brokenness. But that's not accurate. Now, sometimes that is the option. Sometimes that's of the options that are available, that is the best one, right?
Sure.
But ultimately, if more care went to moms to help them, and it's not easy because sometimes they don't want help. So I'm not putting on whatever,
Right.
but
In a perfect world.
right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is going to be the safest environment for that baby is actually going to be a mom who is okay. So not a mom who's harming them or a mom who's neglecting them, but a mom who's okay. And so that maybe looking at, like, I think as American, like in general in the world, I think there's been this idea that if your baby gets to America and gets a family, they're going to be great, right? Like that's the best thing. You'll have money, you'll have whatever picture. And I don't think that's true. And I think that's one of the things that's being recognized is, actually trying to like just start from here and build something. Whatever came before is still there, right? That's still a part of the story, and it actually needs to be recognized. If you don't recognize it, it doesn't work. So you bring in a baby from, I don't know, China, and which they don't now, but I mean, I think they closed adoptions now, but when they had them open, you bring a baby from China here, you need to keep all of those, like strings back, however far it goes, however far that you can get. That child's going to need every little bit of information that they can possibly get to do the best, right? Every amount that you lack is a whole nother hurdle for them. And so, yeah, if we can help moms, and it's dads too. I don't mean it just that. It's just that a lot of times dads may or may not know or may not choose to be in the picture. And it ends up being whether the mom can care for them. It usually is the question on whether or not the baby goes up for adoption or they're kept.
Wow, that's really insightful. So like, the advertising or the focus that adoption is the best solution for babies in those situations, like that's not true. If there was more focus on healing mothers, like that is the best place for a child to grow up is with their biological mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's really,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously it would be case specific and who's any good at making those decisions. Right. But that is exactly right. A couple of influencers, whatever, that I follow talk a lot about the reason that they take care of their health so seriously and they're doing, making themselves more resilient, whatever, so they can be the best version of themselves for their family. It's like, that's what we're talking about here. How can you help to facilitate somebody who's broken, somebody who's struggling, somebody who's having a hard time, who might not have the nuclear family as we would see it in America? Is it better to displace a child? No.
Right.
It's better to prop up the mother.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any ideas on?
Do you have any policy ideas?
Policy ideas. No, but I do think that as far as for the church, that there are active things like when Jesus talks about loving our neighbor, there are like just very practical day-to-day things that we can be doing if we're looking for it, if we're looking for a way. I know when my daughter was still living out of our home and she needed childcare, people in the church stepped in for her. She didn't always pay. Sometimes she couldn't, sometimes she didn't, whatever. And people still showed up for her. And I think when I look back, actually, before we had kids, that was something I did a lot for families that were really struggling. There were a couple times that there were single moms that I just cared for their children for a little while. And it was really hard for me because I wanted to be taking children home at the time. And instead I was caring for children and then sending them back into homes that seemed not so great, right? It was really difficult. But I do still think that was the best thing I could do, is to show care for the mom by being available to help out and being a safe place. Because in reality, in this world, there's a lot of places that aren't actually safe. And I think it's almost impossible, especially when you're talking about young moms. Like, how are they supposed to know where is safe or not safe for their kids, right? Especially if they themselves in their own existence isn't always safe. And so being just available to do that, it can be really hard. It was really hard for me at times. Like I said, partly because I was dealing with infertility, but also it was just hard because it's stressful. There was one time I went to take one of the little boy back that I had been watching, and the mom wasn't there, and the boyfriend showed up, and he was screaming obscenities at me, and I wasn't going to leave the baby there, but it's his son, but that's not who I was watching the kid for. It's messy. It's not simple, and it's hard. And yet at the same time, that's what we're called to do. We're called to just care for the least of these, however we can. And again, that doesn't even mean we're going to get it right? That doesn't mean that I always made the right choice when I did things, or I don't know. But I at least doing my best, trying to listen to the Spirit, trying to respond when I can. And that's really, even now with my daughter, that's what we're doing, trying to give her whatever stability that we can while also allowing her space to learn how to be a mom, right? And it's not always simple, and I sometimes overstep probably, and sometimes maybe I should say something and I don't, who knows? But the fact is that she was homeless and she still has her child, which normally if you are homeless, you can't keep your kid, right? That's part of the thing. And that's
regarding state intervention, or is that what you mean?
Right. Mm-hmm. You would have, if you are homeless with a child, that is one reason to remove a child from a parent's care if they can't provide a home with heat and electricity.
Yeah.
I think I can't remember what exactly the
Basic
things
needs.
are. Yeah. And of course, she wasn't really in danger because she has huge amounts of family, but most people don't, right? She is in a very different situation. But at the same time, if everyone's well, I don't know, maybe she shouldn't care for a kid anyway, you can step back and be well, we'll see if she can do it, or maybe she should have the baby go somewhere else. Those things, that's not really going to fix anything, right? Ultimately, she needs to learn how to be a mom. And so she needs space and help to do that right now because she's young and she couldn't provide for herself, and hopefully we'll get her to the place that she can, right? That's the goal and the hope. But ultimately, that's going to be the best thing for the baby.
I was just going to say that.
Is for her to be in a stable place. That is way better than any other option.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever heard it articulated that way, but it's almost like one of those things that makes sense. If you were to think about it, that makes sense, but it's so counter to what happens. It feels like it's almost like if we would just put our arm around these people who are struggling, then we could embolden them, or we could help them to do what's going to be more beneficial in the long term.
Not to make this political, but
no. You did it.
No, but when it comes to things like abortion, even, I think what a lot of people don't realize, and this is where I would differ on some, because policies are whatever they are. Right. But ultimately, when I have read extensively stories from women who have chosen abortion or not chosen abortion or whatever, and really the ultimate reason, it very, very rarely includes a woman who doesn't want her baby. That is the very smallest minority. The main reason is because women are in situations where they are terrified and they think death for their baby is better than life here because they want to die too, right? Many of them are that depressed and that scared and that unsure about life. And many of them have been sexually abused or physically abused. And so looking at it saying, it's not I'm just have a baby and give it up for adoption. Well, if I get it up for adoption, are they going to be abused there? Are they going to be, who's going to take care of them? I need to look out for them is what they feel like. But they also don't feel like there's anything here that is safe, right? And so ultimately, the thing that's actually going to change women's minds is if they have safety and community that's going to surround them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there. Wow. So I'm sure we know suicide rate statistics post-abortion for mothers, right? We probably know that. Seems obvious. What we probably don't know, because they're not surveying this, what do you know, is suicidal tendencies, or what would you call that? Pre-suicidal, like some people who are suicidal going into the abortion process that we don't know.
Right.
I've never thought about that. Like, so women that are depressed and or potentially suicidal before the abortion, and how like that does nothing to solve that problem, if not heightens it afterwards. But we don't know that because they're not asking that. They're not asking them that before. We only know what happens after.
Right.
So that is a hard thing to battle. It seems like when they're not doing anything to bring that to the light pre-abortion.
Right. And you have to bring that
depressing.
to the light, you have to feel safe enough to actually speak it out loud, right? So if we're looking at women who are afraid and don't have a safe place, then we wouldn't even be able to get the statistics, right? Because they're not going to be talking about it. I feel like the most, like where I hear the most from is women who have walked through that and then met the Lord somewhere along the way, and then are able to look back and articulate, oh, this is where I was, this is what was happening. These are the things that I was afraid of. And I think safety, like felt safety, that which is different than actual safety. Like they may actually be safe, but whether they feel safe or not, which is a big thing that's with my kids all growing up. You know, they were safe with me, but they did not feel safe with me a lot, right? So felt safety is where people are able to open up and share where they actually are. And that's lacking for a lot. You know, I would say the majority of society struggles with felt safety. When you are in crisis, logic means nothing. So like looking at it and saying like logically, this is going to lead me here. It doesn't matter in crisis. Empathy will make a difference if you feel like you're heard, if you feel like somebody sees you. That can make a difference. And then you can get to logic after that. But you can't, I have talked to so many people in the middle of crisis, my children, but many other people as well. And there is no statistic that will make any difference for them when they are scared. They have to deal with their emotional positioning first before you can get to anything. Now, if you can get them settled down, if you can get them to stop for a minute and then go forward, I think that you can, like then showing them things or teaching them things about, you know, this path will lead to these things. That matters. And I've learned this the hard way because there's been so many times where I have tried to tell my daughter, you're going this way and you're not going to like it, right? But it's like talking to a wall. Like it does not penetrate when they're in the middle of crisis, emotional things. Yeah.
So a lot of listening then.
Yeah.
Because like what else is empathy? Just listening.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. And allowing somebody to feel like you hear them, which I think some people get confused. I think especially right now, there's a lot of talking down empathy because they're talking like empathy is agreeing with somebody.
Acceptance.
Or accepting something. And that's not what empathy is.
Exactly.
Empathy is hearing and caring that wherever they are, like it doesn't matter why they're there. I need to show them that they are not voiceless, that what they are saying and what they're experiencing, that they're not crazy, right? Because that's all the thing. Like everything gets swirling in your head. You need to express it in some way, and you need it to be heard.
Versus what would it look like to express unhealthy empathy? Exactly.
I don't know if there's. I would probably disagree that there is any way to show unhealthy empathy, but I do think that there may be people who think, like in identifying somebody else, saying, "Oh, they're trying to be empathetic," and instead they're just
what's the heart of the matter?
Agreeing that like, "Oh, abortions are fine then," or something like that, right?
Gotcha,
they're giving a concession to that, whereas you can actually say when part of it is that people are not good at holding two things at the same time, right? You can hold that abortion is always harmful And you can hold at the same time that there are reasons that somebody finds themselves there that I don't understand. And if I was living through it, I might make the same choice. Right. And so you can hold both those things and have empathy for the fact that, yeah, if I didn't walk through that, but you did, and I hear you. Right. Like just.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is so well said. I don't think people think two things can be true at the same time. Not in the political sphere, that's for sure.
Well, yeah.
Because a lot of the conversations in political issues, especially like this one, this is a huge one, is that multiple things can't be right at the same time. And like you just laid it out really well.
Yeah.
Like most issues are that way. So
yeah.
Very well spoken. Abby Johnson is coming to JCC. Did you see that? Did you know that?
who is
I
that?
saw something about it.
She's go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, she had worked at Planned Parenthood and then, left that and now advocates for pro-life
Interesting.
in the pro-life sphere, I would say.
Yeah. Does she do a good job, do you think?
I
don't know
have
much.
not heard a lot.
Yeah.
I have read like years ago, I think maybe she has a book out that I feel like I read
Probably, yeah.
quite a few years ago. There would probably be things that I really appreciate and really like. I feel really hesitant these days because a lot of people align pretty hard politically with one side or another, and that's always concerning to me. So
Like it's not a political issue; it's a humane issue, or
and I think also like even
or a nuanced issue.
nuance. That would be, that they're, again, like you can be absolutely, I mean, I explained this one time, like I am pro-life in the very deepest sense that you possibly could be. Like obviously children mean a lot to me. That has been a huge thing in my life. Losing babies has been horrible. And so I care deeply about that. But I also care about the teenage moms that are there, and I don't want anyone yelling at them outside of a clinic. And
Right.
That doesn't mean that somebody can't be there graciously and kindly telling them something. But that there's, there's just a lot of things. And I also hear there are a lot of people that are, for example, strongly Democratic that are also strongly pro-life, but that's not the policy that they're voting on, right? But they would be looking at other policies that are not pro-life on the Republican side, but are on the Democratic side. And that's the thing that their heart is centered on, and they see that, and that's fair.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they don't like babies, right?
Exactly.
That's, and so I always feel like I shouldn't say always, in the political climate, the way that it has been the last while, I feel hesitant sometimes to say much because I don't want someone from the other side to think that I'm saying something that I'm not. Maybe that
is an interesting point. It is the political climate now is that if you vote for one person, that means you agree with every policy decision or position that they're in. And then everybody extrapolates that over the entirety of a conversation when it just shouldn't be that way.
Yeah. It's in like debate things, they call it building a straw man,
Yeah,
right?
straw man,
you create an argument that like doesn't actually exist, but it's very easy to like cut it off at the knees then once you build this thing. And so that's, I think that's what it is in the political atmosphere right now, that there's both sides have straw men for the other side. And I do think as believers, especially, we need to be very careful, maybe is the term, just to, and we need to listen very carefully. Because again, people don't care about what logical argument you have if you don't care about them.
Yeah.
Right? So your logic will go nowhere if you're not first listening to them. Because then you can always, like if you won't listen to someone first before you start spitting off logic of whatever makes sense to you, they will just assume that you just don't know. Like there's information that you don't know because they haven't had a chance to tell it to you. Right. And so it really is important to like hear what somebody has to say. So for example, when Trump was elected, I made a statement on Facebook that I was very grieved over it because he is not a good man. And there's reasons why I'm very grieved about that. And some people responded with all of the reasons why I have been brainwashed by media, right? And it was a little bit like, hi, I read a lot, and I actually don't watch just news at all. So everything that I have is because I specifically went and looked up to see what something was said, and I didn't look up anything about him until a certain point when there was enough things and enough people saying things that I started watching some things. And so my opinions were made from things that he said himself. That doesn't mean that he's a horrible person. He's still a human made in the image of God. I still pray for him. I still hope for everything good, right? But I am very grieved about a lot of things with that. And actually anyone's arguments against me when they didn't hear me were pointless arguments. Like, you're arguing something that's not even...
Yeah, you're arguing past me.
Right. Like, that's not even a part of this conversation.
Right.
That's not what this conversation is about. Yeah. And I think that happens a lot, where somebody will share something, and it's both sides. I'm not saying one or the other, and someone will share something, and everyone has their arguments ready that are, that's not the issue at hand. That is not what we're dealing with right here. Yeah. And we need to actually be able to hear, and especially as the body of Christ, we need to be able to hear what is somebody's concerns. Like, what are they fearing? Or what are they grieving? Or what's actually going on, and then have conversations about that. And you might get to the other things, like you might have a chance to, but you got to start there. You can't start with your laundry list of reasons why they've got it wrong.
Yeah. Waiting for the other person to stop talking, not listening to them, and then just to spew out your ideas. That happens a lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Being intellectually honest about a conversation, you can usually tell in like the first 10 seconds if that interaction is being treated that way.
Yep. True.
Yep.
Yeah. Because it quickly stems into all the talking points and everything else.
Yeah.
Most of these issues have such complexity and nuance. Mm-hmm. That's a buzzword nowadays, nuance. But like, maybe we could get back. Maybe we'll call this a nuance podcast. Maybe we could get back to a place where the intentions are laid out ahead of time. That way you can kind of understand the parameters of the game. Right. Because if you're starting to assume, well, that's tricky. And then you already start to build the straw man in your mind that you're going to start arguing against, when that might not even be their position at all.
Right.
And that is all you hear. That's all mainstream, unfortunately right now.
Well, I remember at one point hearing someone say, like, if we could get all of the adults to take some classes on de-escalation, like whatever is going on, if we can work at de-escalating this first. And this is a big thing with raising our kids, right? Like, things would go on and we'd be like, what is going on? And you want it to be like, can you just cut it out? Like, can this just be done? Because I don't know what's going on here. It doesn't need to be this big of a deal, but it was. And so actually, before we could logically say this doesn't matter, we needed to de-escalate the situation, and we needed to get them settled down. And then you can have conversations about what's happening, or why you may have overreacted to that, or why there was whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of like talking points these days are just reiterations of old lessons that have existed forever. Like the fact that we have to rephrase, there's two sides to every story.
Right.
Like it's like we've known this forever, but I feel like there's just something in the media and the content and the stuff that we're absorbing that in the internet culture of reaction, we've had to like dumb it down and back it up to like baby steps to relearning what it means that there's two sides to every story. Now there's two sides to every reaction in a story. And if you got to teach them like they're toddlers and they're grown adults. It's like, can we just take a step back and look at this with nuance? Why would this person think this? Why would this person think this? And it builds this whole story, but like no one's got time for the story anymore.
That may be part of the thing that when we were talking about writing, and that the long form, people they don't have the attention span that they used to. And that, obviously, there's still people that do, but not the general public. That things are down to 30-second clips of something. A headline, right? A lot of people, I think, take their opinions and their thoughts from a headline. That's very true. All of that. I was actually thinking about it because there was when I was a teenager, maybe even younger, I don't know. I remember in Christian circles, there was a like phrase that was used, which was people don't know how much people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Like that was said a lot. And I recently was talking to some people and we're like, do you guys not know this? Like,
where did this not being taught anymore?
I didn't realize, but like you said, like it just that two sides to every story. Like these are like things that we do, but are they being passed on? Do people actually, are they retaining it? That this is really important to be able to have conversations with your neighbors. This is going to matter.
It's funny, during all of the, the rioting, the uprisings, whatever, surrounding George Floyd, I had many conversations with friends, with people that I know from the other side, specifically of the Black community who were voicing these things to me. And it felt very much like at the beginning, like we were like this, like I was seeing it from a cop perspective. They were seeing it from the other perspective. And then as we were able to talk more, I can't speak for them, but as we were able to talk more, I'm starting to think like, okay, you might not understand the police side of most everything. That's fine. You're not a police officer. I don't understand everything on the side of the Black community. Right. I can't relate to that. I don't know it unless I talk to you, unless we can interact and kind of figure some of this stuff out, and maybe we can actually grow together. And I definitely grew. I can't speak for anybody else, but it's just amazing to see that if you can get past that initial grievance or that initial trauma, how much growth there can be through that.
Yeah.
But being willing to do that.
It takes listening. I mean, that's what we were talking about. Like it takes hearing their stories. Yes, being able to tell yours some, but if your goal is to find resolution,
change
then
somebody's mind.
Yeah, but if you want resolution, you gotta be willing to listen.
Correct.
And maybe let your story sit for a minute while you are just absorbing other people's stories of what's going on. There was. I will tell you this story because I feel like this is such a good example, and it's just a parenting thing. But at one point, I had. My daughter was, I don't know what all she was doing. It was my oldest. She was just being frustrating. She was probably 10, 11, something like that. I was trying to get dinner ready. She was like picking at me, arguing about stuff, all the things.
No, a 10-year-old? Come on.
That a kid can do. And I turned to her and said, you need to get out of my kitchen. Like, that was and I'm usually, I'm much more soft-spoken. I'm not a super sharp all the time, but I was that day. And I just made that statement, which a lot of mothers have told their children to get out of their kitchen or to go outside or something, right? Like get away for a little while. And it's a very, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. To my daughter, it was like heart crushing to her. She felt like what I actually said is that I didn't want her anywhere near me and that she was not worthy or good enough or whatever. And I didn't realize that. And so she brought it up a few times. And every time my tendency was to just be like, I wasn't like, it's fine. It was all fine. Mothers say that. It doesn't mean whatever you're trying to say it meant. It did not mean that.
Right.
That I love you. You know that we adopted you. We did. Right. And you want to give this explanation to it. But actually what had to happen is it just kept coming up until I finally was like, wait a minute. And so I finally sat down and said, okay, what did you feel? What did you think that I was saying to you? Why is this so upsetting? Why is this something that is just hanging on? I mean, this was years. She kept talking about it. Yeah. And it was so good for me to just stop and recognize, you know what? It is true. Lots of moms can say that to their kids and it doesn't mean anything. But to mine, it did. And so I needed to adjust, which I did, but I still didn't think that it was that big of a deal, right, for a long time. But I needed to adjust, and I needed to recognize that it was a big deal because of how it affected her. That made it a big deal. Yep. And that doesn't mean that I was horrible. That doesn't mean I was a terrible mom because that happened. Now, if I kept doing it after I knew it was harming her, that would be different. But being able to just stop and listen and give somebody, the right to say, this is hurtful to me. This is how it's affecting me. It's really important. Yeah. And it makes a difference if you want to have a relationship. If you don't care about relationship, then it is whatever it is, I guess. But if you want to have relationship, and again, that's where it comes to why I say, like, as a church, we need to be listening more, because our whole purpose, what Jesus has us here for, is to share the good news, right? Is to have relationship, to love our neighbors. And so it should matter to each of us that we have relationship with whoever the Lord puts in our path to the best of our ability, right? And so listening and trying to hear, how is this affecting you? Why, oh, that's okay. Even if that's not what I meant, if that's how it's affecting you, then how can we adjust? How can we hear each other? And how can we work around that? And obviously in my family, it was really important because this is my daily life. But
right.
Even with your neighbor or somebody down the street or somebody on Facebook, whoever it is, it's part of our calling as believers is to love, and loving means listening. I don't think that you can love anyone well if you're not ever willing to listen to them, right? It's just not going to work. So.
Wow.
Bam. Yeah. The more you come with your, preconceived notions, the quicker your emotions take over your ability to listen. Mm-hmm. And that's very different from hearing somebody and seeing their side of it. Because in that situation, I'm thinking about, in that situation, she probably, it was more personal to her because I've been left before. I've had people not want me before.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And when you start looking at it from that way, it was oh my goodness, I can't believe I said this to my daughter.
Hurtful.
Right. That is not, I don't ever want to be on the same page as the person who literally said, I don't want you in my life. Right. I don't want to be there, but I accidentally got myself there. So deal with it. You can't go back and change it, but you can for sure change what you do in the future. Yeah.
Sounds like a good place to end it.
Yeah, that's just so well said. I don't know where else I would have liked to gotten besides that. It's such a good point. It's such a good thing for people to hear and to be able to leave on. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
This was a really good time. And I hope that you had a good time and you'd come on again some other time to talk about how wonderful Trump is. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking, everybody.
You could do a 6-month evaluation of the administration.
Yeah.
see where it's at.
But I think the substance in this is so much more productive and valuable. What else?
Yeah. And you heard it. In order to love us, you have to listen to us. So
you have to
download this podcast.
Subscribe, whatever.
Nice.
Yeah. But no, thank you so much for being generous with your time and coming and hanging out with us.
It was very impactful. I learned a lot.
Yeah, so did I. and I hope everybody else did.
Yeah, not to, I don't know what the phrase is, but you're very wise, and I appreciate you offering the wisdom to this evening. It was, super enjoyable. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Yep. All right. See you later, everybody.